Okay. We have participants joining rapidly, I think over 60 people now, so we'll begin very shortly. Okay, excellent. So we have all panelists and all speakers here today joining us. So I'll start the session. My name is Aki Enkenberg, and I work as a senior advisor on innovation and digital cooperation for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Finland, representing one of the co-organizers of today's event. And I want to warmly welcome you all to this side event by Finland and Global Pulse. UN Global Pulse, we call it Foresight for Building Back Better. It's linked to the SDI Forum 2021, and the agenda will support, hopefully strongly, this idea of looking at how can we leverage science, technology, and innovation better for the purpose of building back and building forward. Our focus today will be on futures and foresight broadly, their linkages to the agenda around science, technology, and innovation. And of course, from a practical perspective, on the question of how we can better leverage futures and foresight as disciplines, as competencies, and as practices for this agenda. The session will be co-moderated by myself and Tiina Neuvonen, the focal area lead for Foresight from UN Global Pulse. We also have Claudia Sainz from the Global Pulse joining us moderating the chat. The chat is open throughout the session, and your questions and comments are welcomed, and we will use those as part of the question and answers part and the discussion later on in the session. The event will be recorded to keep track of the discussion strictly for our own purposes. And now, if we move to the agenda, we hope to highlight that this set of speakers and perspectives we have lined up today really reflects our aim to approach the subject of foresight from various perspectives, including its policy relevance and how it can support policymaking processes, but also from the perspective of data and analytics. We'll also be looking at collaborative and networked foresight efforts. We'll be looking into new methodologies for foresight, and importantly, discussing the role that the UN system itself can play. And I hope you will find the discussion enjoyable. To start with, if we move on to the next slide, introductory words will be provided by both co-organizers, followed by a keynote and a quick-paced panel discussion. First of all, let me introduce our first two speakers. We have Ambassador Jukka Salovaara, who is the permanent representative of Finland to the United Nations with a long career in public service and really our champion of innovation and foresight in New York. As you will see, we have taken the liberty of including quite a few Finnish speakers on the agenda, reflecting our long tradition in foresight. And then to continue, we have Ms. Ayaka Suzuki, Director of the Strategic Planning and Monitoring Unit in the Executive Office of the Secretary General, focusing on decision-making mechanisms, innovation, data, new technologies, etc., in support of analysis and planning. I'm very curious to hear your perspective to this topic also. But first of all, I will hand it over to the ambassador. Please, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. I hope you can hear me well from New York. Aki, can you give me a thumbs up if the connection is okay?
Everything works.
Okay, very good. Thank you. And thanks, Aki. And it is my pleasure to open this STI Forum 2021 side event, co-hosted by Finland and UN Global Pulse. It's good to be opening this event with Ayaka. We are also extremely pleased to see a number of our partners joining us: the Prime Minister's Office of Finland, UNESCO, the Finnish Innovation Fund Sitra, University of Turku, Demola, and the World Data Lab. Why should we talk about Foresight now? Let me offer a few thoughts. Foresight, future thinking and scenario building in their various forms can greatly strengthen science, technology, and innovation policymaking, and as such deserve to be highlighted in the context of this year's STI Forum. Foresight is also in the core of Agenda 2030. It can and should be used to understand our collective future, define potential pathways, and promote action towards shared goals, the SDGs. We are also witnessing new possibilities emerging through the use of big data and artificial intelligence, improving our capabilities to analyze trends and predict possible outcomes. Over the past year, the importance of foresight has grown even more as the COVID-19 pandemic has exposed the need to improve our ability to anticipate the future and prepare better for such crises. In short, the need to couple foresight and future thinking more systematically in policy planning, implementation, and monitoring has become evident. This is also an area where the UN system can play a key role. As the world prepares to build back better, we want to reinvigorate the discussion on how we can better harness futures and foresight as part of the STI agenda for sustainable development, peace, and humanitarian action. I am very glad to see our friends at UN Global Pulse take this task on, and that the UN Global Pulse Lab in Finland has been asked to lead their work on foresight. It is critical we help countries tap into global knowledge and build local capacity in this field. The Finnish government is happy to support this work going forward. As the program today will hopefully demonstrate, we believe the Finnish experience in using foresight to improve policy planning and implementation, as well as societal participation and competitiveness of our industries, can have a lot to offer. So thank you, and many thanks to the organizers in bringing us together. Over to you.
Many thanks, Ambassador. And now I will turn to Ms. Suzuki. Please, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you so much, Ambassador. And good morning, good afternoon to everybody. I'm very, very pleased to be here with you today. And I also wanted to start by thanking the Permanent Mission of Finland for jointly organizing this very important event with Global Pulse, and also to thank the government of Finland for supporting Global Pulse, which enabled us to establish a new work stream on strategic foresight by generously funding SC Lab Futures and Foresight Initiative. This flagship initiative, which is led by Global Pulse Finland Lab, will provide us with a platform for experimenting with strategic foresight, which can play a really key role in future-proofing the UN and keeping up with the changing times. So we're very, very excited about this initiative. So let me just talk to you a little bit about why it's important for us. As you know, the Secretary General himself has highlighted the increasingly prominent role of strategic foresight for the UN's agenda. It was also reflected in his recent vision statement, which I hope you have seen, restoring trust and inspiring hope for his candidature for his second mandate. And the vision states, among others, that our success in finding solutions to the interlinked problems hinges on our ability to anticipate prevent and prepare for major risks to come, and that we need more innovation, more inclusion, and more foresight, investing in global public goods that sustain us all. So, this is really important in the UN context because the strategic foresight provides value by breaking away from kind of a linear incremental models of innovating by envisioning radically different and disruptive solutions. And we're not used to that at the UN, as you all know. It also helps us elaborate and inspire future visions to drive action and provide a framework for testing alternative solutions, carving pathways for change, and developing robust and resilient policies and strategies, testing them against changing operating environments, and then capturing both the opportunities and risk. So that's the context in which we really feel that this is so important for, as Ambassador just said, paving way for achieving SDGs, among others. So why Global Pulse? Global Pulse recently underwent a strategic review process, the outcome of which was that it should be a hub for innovation and experimentation to catalyze transformation initiatives that are aligned with these priorities. And I think this is a very good example of how we're trying to achieve that goal. And really, as the showcase part of this event, in this later part of this event will illustrate, Foresight has already been proven to be a powerful tool to promote UN mandates and leadership by the power of technology and human imagination. So I'll conclude here, but really to underscore appreciation for co-hosting this event with us. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your kind words. And moving on, let me then introduce our keynote speaker of the day, Jaana Tapanainen-Thies, who is the Secretary General of the Government Report on the Future, the Government Foresight Group, and the Ministerial Foresight Panel at the Prime Minister's Office of Finland. Ms. Tapanainen-Thies is the Sherpa of Finland in the EU-wide Foresight Network and has a long international career in exploring foresight scenario-based strategy processes. Jaana, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Let me just share my screen. Thank you so much for the invitation. Really honored to be here today, and really wonderful to see so many friends, also friends of Foresight, here at today's event. Just a second. So, Finland, we are known to be a forerunner in foresight, and here are some of the background and fundaments we build on. So the world is changing fast, and it has done so also in the past, and we have to continuously find strategic responses and work across sectors, involve all levels of government, and watch for capacities to implement and deliver to meet the challenges. Futures thinking, strategic foresight, it helps in this. And Finland is very known for the foresight work. And here are some of the events on our path to being one of the forerunners in foresight. We have a track record in creating future-oriented structures in decision-making. The Parliamentary Committee of the Future was established in 1993, and since then, each electoral period, the government submits the government report on the future. The Parliament prepares a response to the report, and this forms the formal strategic or futures dialogue between the government and the Parliament. Since 2003, all ministries develop future reviews, also once each electoral period. And these reviews come out before the elections, and they provide information for the elections and for the government formation negotiations. Their purpose is to assess situation and developments in society and examine issues for political decision-making. The Government Foresight Group was founded in 2015, and this is an advisory group to advance national foresight activities and to link foresight better to decision-making processes. The future studies is an established field in Finland. Already in 1980, the government central board of research councils recommended to establish the Finnish Society of Future Studies, and 14 higher education institutions were the founding members. Finland Futures Research Center was founded by 3 universities in 1992, and it's one of the few universities and university departments devoted to futures research in the world. Finland Futures Academy was founded. Yes.
Jana, just sorry to cut you short. The presentation seems not to be working. I wonder if you could reshare it with us, switch it off and then switch it back on again, because the presentation seems to be stuck. So if you switch it back on and put the presentation mode on.
I'm still on the first slide. So
okay.
Let me check. Did it change now?
The presentation mode does not seem to be on. I wonder if
okay. It shows to me that I'm sharing, and I needed to stop sharing. I'll come back here again and try to do that again. Otherwise, what we can do. So
okay. Now it seems to be working better if you switch on the presentation mode. Full screen.
Yes, I have full screen now. Can you see it now?
No.
Can you see my screen?
We can see the screen, but not in presentation mode.
Because for me personally, it shows the presentation mode. I wonder if it is then possible for you to take over the presentation, and because
okay, we have it here.
I have it in presentation mode, but yes.
Okay, you can switch on your camera and we can have the presentation here. Sorry about the glitch. Thank you.
Don't worry. Okay, if you put the next slide, please. Thank you. So what I was saying, that the Finland Futures Academy, that was founded in 1998, and that's a national network of universities providing academic education and research programs in future studies. And the Finland Futures Academy study module is offered in member universities throughout Finland. And the latest development is that futures literacy is now in our core curriculum in schools, and it is taught under multi-literacy, covering also media literacy. And when we look at the developments of the past couple of years, these both are very critical. Another example is the National Skills Anticipation Forum, which produces information on competencies and skills and educational needs of working life in the future. Next slide, please. We have a very broad consensus for the need of foresight. We have a widely shared view of the need for it, and considerable acceptance within various levels of governance. Openness and trust are key, and co-creation, collaboration, and participation are very central to the way we work. We engage stakeholders broadly, but also citizens, businesses, and other actors. The outcomes have a direct impact, and we have a culture of strategic futures dialogue on futures issues. And we also continuously try to increase and develop our capabilities and capacities. Next slide, please. The Prime Minister's office in Finland is coordinating and developing the joint research and joint foresight work in the government and in the ministries. At the moment, the main focus is to move away from project-based foresight to establishing continuous strategic foresight processes in government. And for the first time, the content for the government report on the future is actually done by all ministries to increase the impact of the report. We have to be careful not to outsource the thinking, but to take accountability and ownership also about actively thinking about the future. This way is also learning by doing. So that's the way we do the government report on the future at the moment. And this is also creating capacity and capability by doing it ourselves. So I don't think we need to be scared or too worried if we don't have foresight experts. Those are capabilities that can be learned. So the way we do it also enforces us to have this continuous strategic futures dialogue across and within the government. We also identify research topics as part of these joint government analysis, assessment and research activities, and generate information that supports knowledge-based policy and decision-making. The main foresight processes in the government period are the government report on the future and the future reviews of the ministries. Next slide, please. We have three main pillars of strategic foresight in government, and those regard the government foresight, which is government foresight in the electoral period. These include, for example, situational awareness and analysis, as well as thematic foresight and futures work. So, for example, now in the past year, we've done scenarios on the COVID-19 situation. We also feed to and the process of how we are doing the foresight at the moment in the government report on the future, that was feeding into the government midterm review that was just last week. The continuous foresight in the ministries, the ministerial future reviews. So here, where we develop our common and continuous foresight practices, we also need to have common tools. So this is something we are trying to develop. And also we are developing our horizon scanning and continuous monitoring of the environment. And then thirdly, this almost 30-year tradition of having and harnessing a futures dialogue between the government and the parliament in form of the government report on the future, and our counterpart in the parliament is the Committee for the Future. Next slide, please. So integrating foresight into decision-making processes and preparations, there are sort of three main areas. This is shared understanding of what lies ahead, this continuous strategic futures dialogue across and within government and with parliament, and then the common framework and language. And these are very essential to sort of the way we work, and these are how we have been developing our ways of working towards more sort of true collaboration and co-creation, and to create a shared understanding of what is lying ahead. What are the issues affecting the future of Finland? And again, in the government report on the future process, where we develop scenarios for future generations, these are the questions we've been asking ourselves. What are the drivers of change, and are we prepared for disruptions? This continuous futures dialogue, we have to ask ourselves on what assumptions on future developments our policies are developed and based on, and what are our contingency plans and responses to complex changing conditions. So by engaging in a practical futures work across government, this is also helping to create a common framework and language. So this all is creating and supporting resilience and to being prepared for the future. Next slide, please. So just quickly, what is it that we know? This is a question what we ask ourselves, and Donald Rumsfeld has said about things we know and don't know, and here his words are translated into a framework of knowns and unknowns. So so we look at continuities like megatrends and trends. We engage in scenario planning, and scenarios require decision makers to question assumptions on how the world works. And using scenarios is like rehearsing for the future. And by recognizing the warning signs, we can avoid surprises and adapt and act effectively. So decisions that have been pre-tested against alternative futures are more likely to stand the test of time and to produce robust and resilient strategies. So the result of scenario planning is not really a more accurate picture of the future or guessing the future right, but better thinking and an ongoing strategic conversation about the future. Regarding the if we only knew what we know, so by establishing continuous processes instead of doing singular projects, we are better able to tap into the tacit knowledge within the organization. And then when we have these three fundamentals in place, it's easier to go into these unknown unknowns. So the other sort of preparing our fundaments for that. Next slide, please. And so here we look at we look always at 360 degrees, the whole of environment. We come from the global environment to decision-making processes. And I used to have here the future focus is 10 to 20 years, but since the COVID, I've changed it to 1 to 20 years because this is now the time frame we are looking at. The next slide, please. So here is some of the work that we do and engaged in, and many of these I have already addressed. The main point here is that foresight is embedded in many of our decision-making processes and is a permanent way of working, and we are developing our ways of working constantly. Next slide, please. At the moment, so the government report on the future is a scenario process for Finland for future generations, and we do this in intensive collaboration with all ministries. So this is 12 ministries collaborating together, and so we have identified, for example, 35 factors affecting the future of Finland, and we have analyzed them with all ministries to get a better systems understanding and to identify issues where uncertainty is very high. And so at the moment, we have finalized this scenario process, and we are moving into the writing of the scenario. Next slide, please. This is just
Jana, if I can ask you to wrap up soon, but
yes.
Sorry about disturbing you again. Thank you.
Yeah, don't worry. So we have had 50 dialogues, so we've been trying to not only engage sort of the best experts, but also citizens. So we've had 50 citizen dialogues about the future of Finland. We have collaborated with a Time Out Foundation, and this has been a very rewarding process for us. Next slide, please. And perhaps as a summary, foresight is helping us to solve complex problems, and there are easy steps how to proceed in starting to solving them. And the last slide, please. To conclude, foresight is about better thinking and better decisions. It's not about better predictions. Sorry about going a little bit over time. Thank you so much.
Don't worry, Jana, and this was very good, very interesting food for thought. And I see quite a lot of questions already coming through from the chat, and I have a few myself. But I think we do need to proceed to the panel and give other speakers as well some time to reflect on their perspective. So I'll at this point hand over to Tiina to moderate the next part of the program, and we'll come back to the Q&A after that. But thank you very much again, Jana.
Thank you so much, Aki, and very exciting perspective. Thanks to all of the speakers already for sharing your views. And I'm very excited to be moderating this next session. I think somebody in the chat was already asking about concrete examples. So this is the part that covers the concrete examples for inspiration. And we will have a series of 5 presentations lined up for you. And before we go to the presentations, I will be introducing briefly our speakers. So we will have, if I can get the presenter slides, please. We will have first Jenna Lähdemäki-Pekkinen, and she's the Foresight specialist at the Finnish Innovation Fund Sitra. And then we have Erkki Suutinen, and Erkki is a professor of computer science and interaction design at the University of Turku. And Erkki and Jenna will have a shared presentation titled Popularizing Foresight, and they present the case Futures Frequency. And then we have next, then we hear next from Federico Schür, and Federico is AI and Digital Governance Fellow at the UN Global Pulse and at the Jane Family Institute. And her presentation is Foresight to bring to life opportunity costs and risk of inaction. And then our second cohort of speakers will be started by Mr. Ville Kairamo. And Ville is the CEO of Demola Global, and his presentation is Demola One for Humanity. And after Ville, we will hear from futures literacy to democratize futures as public goods. And this is a presentation by Eva Thurke, and she works as an specialist at UNESCO. And then finally, we will hear from Dr. Homi Karas, and Homi is the Senior Economic Advisor and co-founder at the World Data Lab. And Homi's presentation is on getting granular when looking ahead. But now, without further ado, I would like to give the floor to Jenna and Erkki for the first presentation, and keep the comments and questions coming. Hopefully we will have a few minutes after the presentations for the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tina, and hello everyone. Very nice to be here. My name is Jenna Lähdemäki-Pekkinen, and I work at the Finnish Innovation Fund Sitra. And I'm going to talk to you about our project, The Future Makers, which aims at popularizing and increasing futures capabilities and change-making capabilities. In Sitra, we've come to notice that there's great demand for futures work, but more and more the question asked is that how can I start to use these findings in my own organization, in my own context, without being a Foresight professional or having kind of like a formal training to it. So Jana also mentioned that these are skills that you can learn and that you can acquire. So inspired by this question and also the need to increase futures thinking and change-making capabilities for our era of many ongoing crises and transitions, we've developed this futures frequency workshop method. And it is an open access workshop for anyone to use. So you can find all of the materials at futuresfrequency.fi. And with this workshop method, we aim to make foresight and change making more understandable, more accessible, and also linking futures thinking better to change making is something that's been key in this concept and designing it. Because also one of the often heard feedbacks is that it's hard to link foresight into other processes. It's felt to be very abstract and so on. And the big reason behind starting the project is the urgent need for ecological transition and the belief that in order for us to succeed in this aim and goal, we need more people and organizations to have agency to work towards that direction, to feel that they too can be change makers in this process. And other reasons are that common future images at the moment are quite dark, gloomy, even dystopic, and trust for the future is missing. And this also has an effect on people's sense of agency towards the future. So that's also why we focus on preferable futures in this workshop concept. So the core of futures frequency is to popularize futures thinking, link it to change making, and to get more people to participate and to have a voice in futures discussions. And you can find all of this at futuresfrequency.fi. And now over to Erkki. Thank you very much.
Okay, good morning and good afternoon and good evening from Windhoek in Namibia. So I'm leading at the Future Technology Lab at the premises of University of Namibia, but which is run by University of Turku in Finland. And my presentation is about how we can basically integrate future frequency methodology to just designing future technologies with students and with stakeholders in the context of global. So the Future Technology Lab in Windhoek is the first ever remote campus of any Finnish university overseas. So it was established like 1.5 years ago within University of Namibia main campus in Windhoek. And we refer this campus to as a plug-in campus. So it means that we are not building something great, but actually we are using available resources, services and resources of the host university, in this case, University of Namibia. We just did a bit renovation and then we are running University of Turku here. And the focus is on getting inspired by African opportunities, strengths and resources for co-designing future technologies in the context. You can learn more about our work on the website. But the inspiration is the key thing. So we want to learn, understand, listen to people, and we, rather than working based on demands or needs, we work on strengths and what is available. So example that I would like to briefly show is that we gave like artificial intelligence course. It's an undergraduate course for 4th-year students. And we're working on identifying relevant challenges, imagining a set of solutions, and then taking brave action by creating technology that would work in the context. And rather like this really traditional theoretical course, we actually divided our students into 2 groups. The other one was working on smart flower, actually inspired by a work, with a special education school called sensory school, and then the students, the names of which you can read there. So they were actually developing a teaching assistant with artificial intelligence algorithms to ensure individual learning paths. So this is just the very, very first prototype of it. It doesn't yet look that much as a flower, but it will. And you can use it for several purposes. You can just store all this, get all the information data, and then you can analyze it. The other one was for smart farming, even like we talk about like shack gastronomy. So the idea is actually to come up with the smart facility that stores all the data, so that by which we can actually create like opportunities for better farming, making use of all the information, and also later on actually bring both of these applications further to the context by further co-designing this AI for learning and AI for farming together within communities. And then we can apply these futures frequencies at the grassroots with communities by using the spoken languages, using language technologies, not just science, but also contemporary digital languages that people are using nowadays. So welcome to join us. You see that our laboratory still has a lot of places to sit down and work together. So I'm very happy to invite you and in this challenge. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jenna and Erkki, and I will hand it over right away to the next speaker, who is Federico. So Federico, floor is yours.
Thank you, Tina. Can you see my slides and can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Fantastic. Great. So I'm Federico Schier, and I'm very excited and honored to be a part of this event today. And thank you to the organizers and to all of the speakers today. It's already been an inspiring start into my day. I'm based in New York. I'm a fellow in AI ethics and digital governance. And today I'm going to talk about preferred futures and risks of action and inaction, a case study of the value of futures and foresight in innovation practice. And I hope that my experience can serve as a motivation for those of you who may not yet be experts in experimenting with futures and foresight. Unlike some of my colleagues here on this call, Tina and Claudia, I'm somewhat new to the practice of futures and foresight. I'm a recent front-end fan, you can say, and yet I found it incredibly helpful in developing and future-proofing an emerging area of work, data networks, which I'm going to talk about today. But before I start, I would like to acknowledge really excellent work in this area, data networks, by our colleagues at the Finnish Innovation Fund, Sitra. Thank you. What are data networks? Data networks are mechanisms to increase data access and sharing in a privacy-protecting, ethical, scalable, economically, and environmentally sustainable manner. How does that sound? It's pretty abstract, right? We leverage futures and foresight to bring to life preferred futures, positive visions of what the world could be like. We need data networks to increase data access, to better address humanitarian needs. Imagine a world in which detailed, up-to-date vulnerability maps guide humanitarian relief efforts and algorithms trained on high-resolution satellite imagery direct resources to rebuild critical infrastructure in real time. We need data networks to level access to the data economy. Imagine a world in which stable, reliable access to data promotes inclusive, sustained, and sustainable economic growth grounded in 21st century opportunities in all economies and not just a few. We need data networks to act as a catalyst for innovation to attain the Sustainable Development Goals. Imagine a world in which stable, reliable access to data drives broad and inclusive innovation in key areas such as healthcare, education, and the climate, and so forth. We envision a world in which no poor policy decision, no failure to innovate, and no unintended outcome may ever be attributed to lack of access to data. Futures and foresight brings us to life preferred futures. It makes opportunity cost real and felt, and it inspires people, and it gives reasons for optimism in a world that sometimes can feel heavy. We also leverage futures and foresight to answer the question, do we need to get involved to determine the need for us to shape the present to increase our chances of realizing preferred futures? We look at the signals, trends, and drivers to understand default futures, the way the present is likely to evolve without our intervention. And what do we see? Well, we see largely indiscriminate data collection by private sector companies, and without intervention, we may risk further erosion of privacy and increased surveillance capitalism, discrimination through social scoring, data exploitation, technology colonialism, increased inequality. The list goes on. We see efforts to limit indiscriminate data collection, and we absolutely applaud these efforts. In fact, UNGP is a key actor in shaping data protection and data privacy policy, and yet data may become too inaccessible. Counter movements can overcompensate. We see efforts to empower individuals to have a say in when their data is collected and how it is used. And again, we applaud these efforts. And yet we note that often my data is not just about myself. For example, information about where I am and how I travel around also tends to be informative about my partner's whereabouts. We tend to travel together, not to speak of my genetic data. Individual rights approaches may turn out to have limits when it comes to data protection and privacy. We see calls to leverage data structures, market structures to increase data access, to pay people for their data, so that people can benefit from their own data. And yet that may mean that privacy may become a luxury good. We see suggestions to repurpose tools from decentralized finance, distributed ledger technology, and blockchain to increase data access and sharing, and technically elegant prototypes have been developed. We risk that the future of data access and sharing will be defined by a largely white, male, and global north audience, not unlike what happened in machine learning and AI. Can we get ahead of it this time? There are many different ways how the future evolves from the present. And default futures, the ones that we sketch out based on the signals that we just sort of outlined, may only partially overlap with the futures that we prefer. Futures and foresight can help us see the need to shape the present to increase our chances of realizing preferred futures. We use futures and foresight to understand the risks of our own efforts to shape the present, looking to realize preferred futures. We ask what might go wrong. We start with questioning our own assumptions and looking at our own values as we embark on efforts. Increasing access to data is good if data is used for the right reasons, humanitarian efforts, inclusive growth, inclusive innovation, and if it's done in the right way, privacy protecting, ethically scalable. And yet what might go wrong? Now, all data is collected under specific circumstances, and these do matter for how data can be used. Face recognition algorithms trained on data sets that contain few images of people of color won't work well for people of color, as we've come to know. Lack of access to data and lack of portability of data puts in a way natural limits on the use of data outside of context. And in some sense, that's actually good. It prevents the use of data too far removed from context. And so efforts to increase data access, to increase the portability of data, makes it easier to use data out of context without knowledge of the conditions under which data was collected and or labeled and by whom, and with limited opportunity to ask detailed questions to data collectors. To mitigate these risks, which are inherent in removing obstacles to data access, we need to innovate in areas such as data governance, data provenance, metadata management, and data standardization. Futures and Foresight allows us to identify and mitigate risks before they emerge. We also note, and this is me speaking as a former data science and machine learning researcher and practitioner, it's pretty challenging to get data practitioners today excited about data governance, provenance, data management. What's considered hard today is the development of machine learning models and AI capabilities. And so that's something that I personally really value about engaging with Futures and Foresight. It allows us to take a look at our own culture, what we value more and what we value less. And it allows us to take a critical perspective, which acts as a point of departure for change. And so with that taken together, Futures and Foresight brings to life preferred futures. It makes opportunity costs real and felt. It provides reason for optimism, and it can help rally people around a cause. Futures and Foresight answers, do we need to get involved and need to shape the present to increase our chances to realize preferred futures, the ones that we are collectively excited about? Futures and Foresight answers, what might go wrong, the risk of efforts to shape the present, looking to materialize preferred futures so that we can mitigate them in the now. As such, plans are future-proofed, governance, policy, and technology can evolve in tandem, and preferred futures become more likely. And that's really the key insight and something that I found very exciting engaging with the Futures and Foresight practice. Like, the future doesn't just happen to us. If we do it right, we shape it. If default futures only partially overlap with the preferred futures, then the practice of Futures and Foresight provides us with insights and the tools to act now to ensure that preferred futures become more likely. And we're only just embarking on this effort. We're really excited to start leveraging more collaborative and collective intelligence to sort of broaden this particular project in a much more inclusive manner. And so if you're interested and excited about this effort, please feel free to reach out. Thank you.
Thank you, Federico. That's very exciting. Was next in line, we have Ville Kairamo. So Ville, please.
Thank you, Tina. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, all ladies and gentlemen. Very pleased to be here today, sharing a couple of examples on our journey from Demola Global from the last 10 years of innovation and foresight. My name is Ville Kairamo. I'm based in Finland. I'm CEO of Finland-based, globally working social enterprise called Demola Global. I was thinking today, as we only have 5 minutes time, that I decided not to share a presentation or PowerPoint today, but instead like trying to highlight a couple of essential lessons learned from our journey of facilitating more than 5,000 co-creation projects between academia and industry and governments in more than 25 countries during the last year. And to get started, I actually like want to point out like a comment in the chat what the previous speaker, like Jana Tapaninen-Thies, was like highlighting, that like she was mentioning that foresight is about better thinking and decisions, not about better predictions. And based on our kind of like practitioner experience, I very much agree on Jana's interpretation, because we think future it's like a story, and like all good storytellers, it always gives some advance clues, and afterwards, when things are happening and becoming kind of big things and major megatrends and becoming reality, it's relatively easy to point out that we should have seen it, but we didn't. And foresight and strategic development, it's not about being right or wrong, but I think it's about getting prepared. It's about increasing readiness to point out different possible futures, and always thinking different alternatives, different what if scenarios, and not only blindly believing in one specific scenario that we think will be the case. Our story starts from Finnish industry and a sincere belief in this diverse and multidisciplinary innovation work. And we were looking like 10 years ago, different ways, how could we challenge our current ways of thinking and current kind of thinking patterns by utilizing university students and graduates, recent graduates, well, in Finland and more recently all around the world. To think about possible first innovative concepts and nowadays different kind of like future pictures and what if scenarios and eventually kind of thinking is that how can we change the world like to the positive direction and create some positive change. Earlier on, we were like facilitating projects set by single organizations like companies and governments. But to be honest, we got a bit frustrated in the lack of ambition in a way, and sometimes lack of courage on what type of problems we should be looking at. And during the last 1.5 years, almost 2 years to now, we have been challenging ourselves and setting the questions by ourselves and lifting the ambition level and investing our Demola Global's experts' time into co-creation with next generation, these experts and leaders, to explore a variety of phenomena from social changes, humanitarian aspects to technology and business and different value chains, and combining the perspectives from both the most advanced innovation ecosystems like North America, Nordic countries, Finland, Japan, Singapore, and so on, but also like investing heavily in the developing world as we see like a lot of very interesting bubbling under kind of examples coming from Africa or Latin America and so on that I think we all can learn a lot from in a way and think that what does it mean? Why do these people think like they do? During the last 12 months, we have had participants from 858 universities in 79 countries, and this year we are facilitating over 500 global teams to collect the data and insights and create possible kind of an interesting scenarios. Basically, I think one of the findings from all what we have been doing is that most of the organizations and most of the leaders around the world, they know different phenomena. They know what's coming out. They know the megatrends that are coming. But what is the hard part is that what is the interpretation? What does it mean for us? How to turn it into actionable thing? And this is the big question. And often the megatrends or often the like Foresight data for corporates, for instance, it's like a blank sheet. We know that something should be done, but we don't know where to start, which often makes it a lot easier, well, not to do anything. Or starting thinking, for example, sustainability more as a marketing trick instead of thinking is that how does it change our purpose or how does it change our business model or reason of existence if going even ambitious. Basically, to conclude, and one of the initiatives we launched this year is that in cooperation with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Finland, we have been launching an initiative called One for Humanity. And during 2021, we are facilitating over 200 global teams of change makers and bringing the most motivated Generation Z people all around the world to work with us on 6 selected topics from multipolarization to new drivers of wealth and time beyond the data, and of course, not forgetting climate crisis and a couple of other very important topics. At the moment, we are in the insight collection and weak signal collection phase, and we are looking forward to in the end of the year to bring together with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs all of this data and findings to the global society, and looking forward to cooperate also with UN Pulse. But thank you from my side, and over to you, Tiina.
Thank you so much, Ville. Very exciting reflections, and we still have 2 wonderful speakers lined up, Eva and Homi, and we're going to be going a little bit over time, but I hope that you will stay in our company and hear the remaining speakers as well. But I will now hand it over to Eva, and she will talk about futures literacy to democratize futures as public goods. So Eva, over to you.
Thanks, Tina, and thanks so much to the entire team. And of course, thanks to all of you for staying on a little bit longer than anticipated. And since we're going to talk about anticipation, that actually sounds properly on topic. So what I'll be doing is actually telling you to explore the fluidity of temporalities while trying to be as rigid on time as I can. But in order to understand the topic of this presentation, which is about how futures literacy is used to democratize futures as public goods, it might be useful to actually take a step back and understand the conventional approaches that we have to futures. Usually we consider three of those: forecast, foresight, and planning. For forecast, you've heard it before during the different presentation that we had earlier today around this idea of economic forecast, basically generating predictive data around, for example, the amount of growth. So we see that a lot, for example, where I'm from, when we're talking about the increase of mobile or smartphones by a certain amount of years, or you can see the growth of our economies by, let's say, the third trimester. All of those data that could be produced, you also know of weather forecasts that can also be useful. In that sense, once again, it's about generating predictive data. When it comes to foresight, usually one of the easy definition is about the production of scenarios that are used by our governments, as was explained earlier by Iana, for example, or it can also be used by firms and different companies, as of course the UN systems. For example, we have the HLCP Foresight Network that is currently being led by UNESCO. And the same thing would go for example, for planning, in the sense that it is about producing items. The idea is to say, we know what the future that we want to go to. Like, for example, when we're talking about Agenda 2063 for the African Union, we know the Africa we want. Now, the question is, what are the steps that are going to lead us to that specific future? For planning, HLCP also has its own specific group. And the idea is that we see that those conventional approaches all have common threads. I'll name two. The first one is around futures. And of course, you would say, well, the future does not exist, which is also a correct assumption to be made, which means that what we're focused on is the anticipations, the images of the future that are produced thanks to those approaches. The second common thread that we have is the fact that they're all tool-based approaches. It's about horizon scanning, it's about Delphi, it's about futures wheel, what if scenarios, you name it. Now, the issue that in the limitation that we've encountered so far when it comes to tool-based approaches is the fact that sometimes we don't have the opportunity to actually explore the sources of our imagination, the structures that are used for our imaginations, what we call anticipatory assumptions when it comes to the entry points to our futures, or what we call anticipatory systems, which are the systems that we mobilize in order to anticipate. And the reason for that is that a tool-based approach is not enough for us to capture all of this. We do need what we call a competency. That's when future literacy actually come forward. It's this idea that we actually need to understand why and how humans anticipate. But the difference between a tool-based approach and a competency-based approach is that if I give you a tool, I tell you where to click on switch on, switch off, I tell you what it's used for, and then you can master the tool based on the instructions that are given. When it comes to a competency, what you can do with it will depend strictly on who you are, your background, your culture, and it requires an entire infrastructure for you to actually acquire this competency. For example, if you think about literacy, we've built schools, we've actually have teachers that we train, they have different trainings. For computer literacy, it's the same thing, so on and so forth. So what we've been trying to do as part of UNESCO for the Future Literacy team, as part of the social and human sciences sector, is actually to try to build this infrastructure that would enable as many people on this planet to actually use different tools and infrastructures. We want to build communities of practice through the different UNESCO chairs that we have. We have over 20 UNESCO chairs, reaching 35 by the end of the year. We also adopt an approach that is based on different disciplines. visual anticipation, archaeology, land sustainability, decolonizing educational systems, and of course, FFRC, Finland Futures Research Center that Jana was telling about earlier, is one of the UNESCO chairs that are also pushing the envelope for all of this, because the idea is that futures are relevant not only to just those that are doing futures, but actually to all disciplines and actors, which means that what we need to embrace is what we call participatory processes. What we've been trying to do is actually to change the settings in which we're conducting futures exercise. For example, we've been developing since November a series of activities of what we call futures literacy labs, which are those workshops that we organize, for which I'll actually just send you a link for you to see what it looks like in the different actors and map to our different activities as well. When it comes to
Eva, I'm really sorry, but if I can please ask you to wrap up so we can give floor to the presenter. Thank you.
Can I just have 1 minute so that I can just give the different elements?
10 seconds.
Okay.
If you can wrap up and we can refer to the materials, that's great if you can share the link with us. So we'll be having a look. But yeah, we
Sure.
have to. Apologies.
No, that's fine. In terms of settings, so we've shifted from, for example, to family settings for this project organized within Syrian families in Lebanon. The idea was to say that futures are not only relevant when we're organizing strategies within corporations or within governments, it's also relevant to people directly. And we've seen that in the ways people are actually envisioning the sources of hopes and the sources of fears. That was actually a pretty useful tool to be used for them to acquire a competency. We've changed the type of actors that were also involved. So when it comes to UN actions, and that's also part of the call for actions, we've seen that those type of collaboration across UN agencies was actually useful when it comes to, for example, disaster risk management on one side, this idea of using innovation on the other side, all combined, trying to reach out to different actors, reaching out to the youth, reaching out to policy makers. Because in fact, the whole point around futures is about agency.
Thank you, Eva. I'm sorry I have to stop you here. I know that we could continue for a long time. It's very, very interesting, but we'll be a little bit over time now. So I'll be handing the floor to our final speaker, to Dr. Homi Karas. So Homi, the floor is yours. And I think there's a lot of information for us to digest, and we will continue the conversation in the form of blog post after the event. So keep on monitoring the UN Global Pulse website and the blog. And we will also have the recording. I think I definitely have to revisit the presentations, and I hope you'll do the same. But Homi, over to you.
Thank you, Tina. So at World Data Lab, we think that if we're going to have a conversation about the future, it's useful to try to base that conversation on some common set of quantitative assessments of what the future will bring. I think it's very important to recognize that these are not predictions about the future, but we do have to start with somewhere. And so what I want to focus on is how do we think about the future specifically with respect to the Leave No One Behind agenda. The future has many different things. If we're going to have these kinds of conversations, I think we have to be very focused about what we're talking about. Otherwise, we talk about the fact that the world is complex. So we have tried at World Data Lab to essentially always try to be granular. And what we essentially think about is who are the people that we're talking about? How many people, let's say for the sake of argument with respect to extreme poverty or hunger, how many people do we need to reach? What are their characteristics? I think that Ville said we have to establish the level of ambition. Without some quantitative sense, we can't get to this sense of what is the level of ambition. We have to identify where do they live. We don't take actions at an international or global level. We usually take actions at a very local level. we have to have information that is relevant to local decision making. And finally, exactly what problems are we trying to talk about? And in the Leave No One Behind agenda, we talk about things like poverty, hunger, health, education, all of those kinds of things. The issue that we have is that despite all of these great plans for the world that are embedded in the Sustainable Development Goals, we actually don't have scenarios and trends about each of these major kinds of things. And that's basically what we have tried to build at World Data Lab. So we have a tool that's called the World Poverty Clock. You can go into the World Poverty Clock and you can see in real time exactly how many people we anticipate are living in extreme poverty at any point in time, with a scenario which shows you this is what might happen under existing trends. And we try to push that down to as granular a level as we can. So we don't just talk about countries, we also talk about subnational areas. We've done the same thing with hunger and the World Hunger Clock that uses things like food insecurity. When you do that and you really push it down, then you can start to have a number of conversations. And what we see, the insights that emerge out of this kind of work happening, is actually building conversations in the media, amongst policymakers, in all kinds of areas which we do not try to control or monitor or measure. But when you put the data out there in that kind of form, people can use it and build their own dialogues and discussions about what's going on about that specific problem. And that's where we see the real value of this kind of foresight to be. So I'd just like to close by saying that even though we know and we understand that predictions are not what foresight is about, without some sense of what the future will bring, it's very difficult to manage and imagine what the level of ambition is, where we're succeeding and where we're falling short, and to push the discussions down to a granular level where real decisions can be made. Thank you.
Many thanks, Homi. That's a perfect way of ending our showcase piece. And I'm really, truly sorry I couldn't give you all more time. We'd love to hear much, much more from you and hope the conversation to continue after the event. But I thank you all on my behalf and hand it over for Aki for the final closing remarks. Take care, everybody, and thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you to all the panelists, all the speakers today. Thank you, Tina, for moderating that session as well. I think it's as Eva said, that how did we not anticipate that we would run out of time here, because the discussion has been so rich. So we would definitely have needed a couple of hours for this, but we went through a rich tapestry of ideas and solutions on how Foresight can really support the building back better and greener agenda from the angles of policy, research and practice. And I think the key really is not to build back as it were, but to future-proof our efforts. And for this particular objective, I think a fundamental issue is really how we can share these approaches and tools as widely as possible, and to kind of forge a more participatory way to think and act on the future. And this definitely requires new competencies and literacies, as we heard from Eva. We also need new methodologies to facilitate foresight, such as the future's frequency example. We need new ways to uncover and analyze data, as we heard from Homi from the World Data Lab. And we definitely need more networked and participatory efforts, like we heard from Ville from Demola Global and Erkki Sutinen from the University of Turku, to really build capacity where it's needed. And it's also important to enhance the link, the policy link, as we heard loud and clear from Jana and the Finnish Prime Minister's office. And this is really about how we use, not only create new knowledge. And as Dina said, we hope to continue the discussion, and as a next step, we'll be producing a blog post highlighting some of these ideas and pointing also out to the organizations involved, your work and your resources that can be easily accessed. And we hope to also answer some of the questions we didn't have time for today as part of that effort. And the intention of the Finnish government also really is to continue supporting this agenda in the coming months and years, including Global Pulse's growing portfolio of work in the field of foresight and futures. So once again, I'll just conclude, say thank you to everyone, and have a great rest of the day, afternoon, or evening, depending on which time zone you happen to be in. And I'll close the meeting now. Thanks again. Bye.
Thanks, Aki. Bye, everyone.